The Imperium Eternal had reigned for millennia, stretching its dominion across the stars with an iron hand. Its fleets, vast and unyielding, patrolled the galactic frontiers, ensuring the continued survival of its rule. Civilization under the Imperium was absolute. Every planet, every species under its control adhered to its will. Rebellion was a rare, foolish endeavor, quickly stamped out before it could fester. The Imperium was eternal, unshaken, and beyond contestation. Yet for all its power, for all its reach, there was one place even the Imperium dared not go. It lay at the fringes of known space, beyond the border worlds, beyond the trade routes, beyond the grasp of civilization itself. The Dead Zone, a region of voids so vast and so feared that even the most ambitious warlords, the most cunning explorers, and the most reckless scavengers avoided it. It was not merely a place. It was a warning, a testament to something beyond comprehension. The history of the Dead Zone was not written in the Imperium's records, for there were no records. Every attempt to map it ended in failure. Every expedition sent vanished without a trace. Even automated probes, with no crew to fear the unknown, would simply cease transmission, as though erased from existence. Entire armadas had once ventured close, their admirals believing they could impose order upon the dark unknown. They had not returned. Over the centuries, legends formed. The Dead Zone became a myth, a cursed place spoken of in whispers among spacers and traders, a region of pure black where time and matter unraveled. Stories spoke of ghost ships drifting aimlessly, their crews long since perished, yet their distress signals still transmitting. Some claimed to have seen flickering lights at its borders, shadows of unknown vessels watching from the dark. Others spoke of voices, transmissions intercepted by accident, nothing but whispers and static, yet carrying messages in languages no species had ever spoken. To the Imperium, the Dead Zone was not just an anomaly. It was a wound in the fabric of reality. The fear of it was not superstition, it was survival. Those who ignored its warnings did not live to tell their tale. Thus, the Imperium did the one thing it had never done before. It refused to conquer. It placed no fleets along its edges. It left no outposts, no beacons, no patrols. Instead, it drew a line in the stars, an invisible but absolute barrier, beyond which no ship would be permitted to go. And for thousands of years, this command had been obeyed without question. Until now, on the bridge of the warship Indomitus, Admiral Tovin Var hesitated before the holographic display. He was a veteran of 100 battles, a warrior forged in the fires of conquest. His name was legend across the Imperium's dominion, spoken in awe by those who feared the wrath of the Empire. And yet here, at the edge of the Dead Zone, he felt something he had not felt in decades. Unease. Still no response? He asked, his voice carefully measured. None, Admiral, came the reply from his comms officer, a young lieutenant with a furrowed brow. Our messages aren't just unanswered. They're not even being received. The signal doesn't reach them at all. Tovin's gaze darkened. He had sent a warning to the ships that had crossed into the Dead Zone. They had not responded. That by itself was alarming. But more concerning was the nature of the ships that had dared enter that forsaken void. They were human. The Imperium had only known of the species for a handful of centuries, a blink in the timeline of the Empire. Humanity was a young species, reckless and untamed, expanding outward with a speed that defied logic. They lacked the technological superiority of the Imperium's war machines, but what they lacked in power, they made up for in defiance. They were explorers, pioneers, risk-takers. And now, they had done the unthinkable. They crossed 2 cycles ago, said the ship's intelligence officer, reading over the last intercepted logs. Their fleet consisted of 6 vessels, 3 science ships, 2 support vessels, and a single warship, though its armament is limited. They were scanning the edges of the Dead Zone before entry. Tovin frowned. Fools, he muttered. They have no idea what they're walking into. There was a long silence on the bridge, the weight of those words hanging over the crew. The Imperium had seen many civilizations rise and fall, but never had it encountered a species so willing to leap into the abyss without caution. Where others hesitated, humans advanced. Where others feared, humans questioned. They were unshackled by the legends that bound the Imperium and its vassals. Perhaps that was why they were the first to break the ancient law. Tovin turned to his navigation officer. "Show me the last known coordinates of their fleet." The holographic display flickered, and a three-dimensional star map materialized before him. The dead zone was vast, an empty gulf of space where nothing should exist, where nothing should be possible. The human fleet had crossed into its threshold, pushing toward a cluster of derelict stations, relics from a civilization that had vanished long before the Imperium had ever come to power. That alone should have stopped them. It hadn't. "They're not responding to hails, and they've disappeared from conventional tracking," said the comms officer. "And the Imperium's long-range scanners?" Tovin asked, not detecting anything. Tovin exhaled slowly. They were gone, just like every fleet that had come before them. Perhaps, in a few cycles, the Imperium would intercept ghostly transmissions, the last echoes of a doomed expedition. Perhaps their ships would one day be found, floating lifelessly, their hulls torn open from within by an unseen force. Or perhaps, as always, they would simply cease to exist, erased from reality by whatever lay hidden within that forsaken dark. And yet, as he looked at the flickering edge of the dead zone, a thought unsettled him. What if this time it was different? The Imperium had spent thousands of years avoiding the abyss, choosing ignorance over confrontation. But these humans, they did not turn away. They did not fear the unknown. For the first time in his life, Admiral Tovin wondered if that would be their doom, or their salvation. The void was vast, silent, and unyielding. To some, space was a great unknown, a frontier waiting to be tamed. To others, it was an abyss, indifferent and merciless to those who dared challenge it. To Captain Elias Mercer, commander of the Aurora, it was both. He stood at the heart of the bridge, hands clasped behind his back as he stared into the holographic display before him. The Aurora and its fleet had crossed the threshold 2 standard days ago, passing into the region of space no other species had dared enter. They were now alone, beyond the reach of human colonies, beyond the oversight of the Imperium. And yet, Elias felt no fear. "Status?" he asked. His first officer, Commander Lien Porter, scanned her readings. "All systems nominal. No anomalies detected. So far, it's just empty." Elias glanced at the view beyond the bridge's observation window. Stars hung like frozen fireflies in the infinite dark. To an untrained eye, it was just another section of deep space, no different from the thousands of others humanity had explored. But it wasn't. The dead zone had been a forbidden mystery for centuries, a void that swallowed entire fleets. The Imperium feared it. Every species they had encountered feared it. But humanity? Humanity saw a challenge. Elias had read the Imperium's warnings before their fleet departed. Warnings of entire civilizations erased from history, of ships lost without explanation, of ancient relics best left untouched. The Imperium refused to discuss what they might have found in this place, as if silence itself could contain the unknown. That was not the way of humanity. "Deploy survey drones," Elias ordered. "Aye, Captain." Lien pressed a sequence of commands, and a moment later, the ship's external launch bays hissed open. 6 drones shot forward, streaking into the void with precision, their sensor arrays lighting up as they scanned their surroundings. On the display, data began to stream in. No immediate threats, reported Ensign Rourke from the sensor station. No gravitational anomalies, no radiation bursts, no energy fluctuations. "Then why the hell was this place off limits?" muttered Lieutenant Karras, the ship's weapons officer. "The Imperium acts like this place eats ships for breakfast." Elias didn't answer. He had the same question. The first day of their expedition had passed without event. The second was following the same pattern. The fleet consisted of 6 vessels, 3 science ships, 2 support vessels, and the Aurora, a state-of-the-art deep space reconnaissance warship. While it was heavily armed, Its mission here was not one of conquest, but of discovery. And so far, there was nothing to discover. A flicker of motion in the holographic display caught Elias' attention. "Hold on." Rourke frowned, tapping rapidly at his console. "Captain, I'm getting something on long-range scans. Distance, 50,000 kilometers. What kind of something?" "Unknown." Rourke's fingers danced across the controls. "It's faint, but there's structure to it. A construct of some kind." Elias exchanged a glance with Lien. "Bring it up," he ordered. The display shifted, zooming in on the anomaly. At first, it was difficult to make out, but as the drones adjusted their scans, the shape became clear. It was massive, several kilometers in diameter, a vast skeletal structure drifting silently in the void. Its surface was pitted with scars, sections broken apart as if it had suffered immense damage. "That's a station," Lien murmured, leaning forward. "More than that," Elias said. "It's ancient." The station's architecture was like nothing they had ever seen. It was neither human nor Imperium, nor did it match the known designs of any other species humanity had encountered. Jagged protrusions extended from its core, like the ribcage of some long-dead beast. Dark metal, marked with unrecognizable symbols, gleamed under the distant light of the stars. "Captain," Rourke's voice wavered. "I just ran a deep scan. That station is over 1,000,000 years old." The bridge fell silent. 1,000,000 years. Before the Imperium. Before human civilization had even mastered fire. Kara's exhaled. "We shouldn't be here." Elias ignored him. "Life signs." "Negative," Rourke confirmed. "No movement, no energy signatures. It's dead." Elias made his decision. "We're moving in." A murmur rippled through the bridge. Lien hesitated. "Sir, the Imperium's warnings." "I know." Elias' voice was firm. "And I also know that we came here for answers." There was no turning back now. The Aurora advanced toward the derelict station, its fleet following in careful formation. As they drew closer, more details emerged. Vast docking bays, shattered hull sections, corridors stretching into lightless depths. A docking port loomed ahead, large enough for a human vessel to fit through. "Prepare an away team," Elias ordered. Lien hesitated. "You want to board that thing?" "Yes." She exhaled. "Understood." Minutes later, Elias and a team of 6, Lien included, stood in the ship's airlock, suited up and armed. The docking sequence engaged, and the airlock cycled open. A bridge extended from the Aurora, sealing against the ancient station's hull. The first step onto the station was like stepping into the ruins of a dead god's cathedral. The air was stale, though still pressurized. Their suit lights flickered against towering walls, engraved with symbols that no species could decipher. The silence was absolute. "This place is huge," Karas muttered, scanning the area with his rifle. "And I don't like it." Elias pressed forward, his eyes locked on a corridor leading deeper inside. The passage was lined with what looked like consoles, their surfaces long since dead. But something ahead caught his attention. A door. It stood at the end of the corridor, massive and foreboding. And unlike the rest of the station, it was intact, sealed tight, untouched by time. Rourke examined it. "This door, it's got power." Lien looked at Elias. "Captain, if there's something behind that door." "There is," Elias said. His gut told him that whatever secrets the dead zone held, they were behind that door. And for the first time, as his gloved hand hovered over the controls, he felt something he had not expected. Something watching, something waiting, something alive. With a deep breath, he pressed the activation switch. The door rumbled, and then it opened. The door yawned open with a slow, grinding groan. Stale air, untouched for millennia, rushed out in a breathless whisper, stirring the dust that had long settled in the ancient corridors. Captain Elias Mercer stood at the threshold, heart pounding, as his suit's lights illuminated the darkness beyond. The chamber before them was immense, a vast space lined with consoles, towering pillars, and strange, monolithic structures arranged in patterns too precise to be random. And at the center, something pulsed. It was faint, so faint that it was almost imperceptible, but Elias saw it. A dim glow, buried beneath layers of alien machinery, flickered like the last dying embers of a fire. Holy shit, Lieutenant Kara's breathed. This place isn't dead. Commander Lien Porter checked her scanner, her brow furrowing beneath her helmet. I don't understand. Every other system in the station is completely inert. How is there still power running through here? Elias didn't answer. Instead, he took a cautious step forward, his boots echoing against the metal floor. This place, whatever it had once been, still held on to something. Something that had endured long after its creators had vanished. Scan everything, he ordered. We need to document this. The away team moved into position, activating their equipment. Data streams flooded their HUDs, but the readings made no sense. The materials composing the walls and consoles were unlike anything in human records, resistant to standard classification. The symbols engraved along the surfaces of the monoliths seemed to shift under direct observation, refusing to remain static. Then, Rourke's voice crackled through the comms. Captain? You might want to see this." Elias turned to find the ensign kneeling beside a console near the chamber's edge. Rourke gestured to the floor, where a body lay slumped against the base of the machinery. Not human, not Imperium. It was alien. The skeletal remains were elongated, with a rib cage that stretched unnaturally and arms that ended in six-jointed fingers. The skull was elongated, with hollow eye sockets that seemed to stare into the abyss of time. The body had been here for centuries, perhaps longer. Lien exhaled. This confirms it. A civilization existed here, and it died here. Elias knelt beside the corpse, studying it. The bones were darkened, petrified with age, yet there were no signs of decomposition beyond natural erosion. Whatever had killed this being had done so long ago. But it wasn't just one. The deeper they searched, the more remains they found, scattered across the chamber, slumped over consoles, curled into the corners of the walls, as if they had been hiding from something. What the hell happened here? Karras muttered. Before Elias could respond, his comms crackled. "Captain Mercer, this is the Aurora. We have a situation." Elias tapped his wrist controls. "Go ahead." The voice of Lieutenant Commander Hadfield, the ship's acting officer in his absence, came through, laced with urgency. "Sir, one of our science ships, Osiris, has gone dark. No distress signal, no transmissions. They were positioned just a few thousand kilometers from our location, monitoring a derelict structure." Elias stiffened. "Did you detect any threats? Any hostile activity?" "Negative. They just vanished." The bridge of the Aurora was in chaos when Elias and his team returned from the station. The moment he stepped onto the command deck, the hum of activity surrounded him. Officers at their stations, data streams scrolling too fast for the human eye to track, voices speaking over one another in urgent tones. Hadfield turned as Elias approached. "Sir, we're still trying to reestablish contact, but there's nothing. The Osiris was there one moment and gone the next." Elias strode toward the central hollow display, where the last known position of the Osiris flickered in red. A derelict structure, similar to the station they had just explored, hovered at the periphery. He clenched his jaw. "We sent a search team. Deploy a recon shuttle." Lien hesitated. "Sir, if something took the Osiris, sending another ship might be a mistake. And doing nothing guarantees we never find out what happened," Elias countered. "We came here to explore. That means facing risks." Lien nodded grimly. Minutes later, the recon shuttle launched, streaking toward the last known location of the Osiris. The tension on the bridge was palpable as they monitored its progress. Then, "Captain," Rourke said, his voice laced with alarm. "I'm detecting something." "What?" "Residual energy signatures, but they don't match anything we've ever seen." On the hollow display, a strange distortion rippled through space, a flickering anomaly where the Osiris had been. The distortion was subtle, almost imperceptible, as if the very fabric of reality had twisted. Then, the shuttle pilot's voice crackled through the comms. Command? I think we found the Osiris." Silence. Elias leaned forward. "Report." The pilot hesitated. "Sir, I don't know how to explain this. The Osiris is there, but it's not normal. It's the signal cut. Then alarm screamed. The hollow display flashed red as a burst of unknown energy rippled outward from the anomaly, swallowing the shuttle in an instant. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't an attack. It was simply erasure. One moment the shuttle was there, the next it was gone, just like the Osiris. Panic gripped the bridge. "Captain, whatever this is, it's beyond anything we understand," Hadfield said, her voice low. Elias' mind raced. The Imperium had feared this place for millennia. They had refused to explore, refused to engage, refused to uncover the truth. But humanity had done what no other species had. And now they had lost 2 ships. Elias exhaled. Fear was gnawing at the edges of his mind, but he refused to succumb to it. "This isn't just a dead zone," he murmured. "Something is active here, and it knows we're here." Lien turned to him, eyes hard. "So what do we do?" Elias clenched his fists. "We do what humans do best." He turned back to the holographic display, gaze locked on the flickering distortion where the Osiris had once been. "We figure out what the hell we're dealing with." The bridge of the Aurora was deathly silent. The crew stared at the hollow display, where the anomaly flickered like a wound in space. 2 ships, Osiris and the recon shuttle, had vanished without a trace. There were no wrecks, no debris, no distress beacons. They had simply ceased to exist. Captain Elias Mercer exhaled slowly, his hands clenched behind his back. His crew was waiting for his command, waiting for answers that he didn't yet have. He could feel their fear pressing in around him, thick and suffocating. Commander Lien Porter broke the silence. "Sir, we need to assume the worst. Whatever happened to the Osiris and the shuttle, it's something we don't understand. We might be dealing with a force beyond our ability to combat." Elias nodded. "I know." He turned to Lieutenant Rourke. "Pull every bit of data we gathered before the shuttle was lost. I want to know exactly what they saw before they vanished." "Aye, Captain." Rourke's fingers flew over the console. The seconds stretched into minutes as he sifted through the residual data streams. Then something flickered on the display. "Got something," Rourke murmured. He magnified a fragment of the final transmission, a frame-by-frame playback from shuttle's sensors. At first, it was nothing but darkness. Then movement, a shape impossible to define, flickered at the edges of perception. It was as if the space itself twisted, bending light and shadow into something unnatural. The shape was vast, spanning kilometers, yet it seemed to phase in and out of reality. Then, in the final frame, something looked back. The image wasn't clear, it couldn't be. But whatever it was, the moment the sensors locked onto it, the shuttle had ceased to exist. A hush fell over the bridge. Lien whispered, "That wasn't a ship. That was..." She trailed off, unable to find the words. Elias inhaled sharply. It was alive. Hadfield turned pale. "Sir, if that thing is still out there, then we need to know what it is," Elias finished. He straightened. "We didn't come this far just to turn back." Lien rounded on him. "Captain, this isn't just about exploration anymore. We've lost 2 ships. That thing, whatever it is, erased them." Elias met her gaze evenly, "Which is exactly why we need to understand it." Silence stretched between them. Lien exhaled and nodded reluctantly. "Then we need to be smarter about it." Hours later, aboard the research station Omega-1, the humans had come prepared. 3 research stations had been established along the edge of the dead zone, positioned in high orbit above derelict alien structures. The Aurora had transferred scientific teams to the stations, along with all the data gathered from the derelict station where they had found the skeletal remains. Omega-1 was the most advanced of the 3 stations, outfitted with quantum resonance scanners, deep space observation arrays, and an AI-driven analysis core. If there were answers to be found, they would find them here. Dr. Evelyn Voss, lead scientist on the expedition, stood in front of a massive display as data scrolled rapidly across it. She barely registered the presence of Captain Mercer as he entered. "We've been analyzing the anomaly," she began, her voice taut with suppressed excitement. "And we found something disturbing." Elias crossed his arms. "Go on." Evelyn tapped a section of the screen. A waveform appeared, an energy signature unlike anything he had ever seen. This, she said, is the background radiation of the anomaly. It's not natural. It's not even random. It's structured. Elias frowned. What are you saying? Evelyn looked at him, her expression grave. It's a signal. A broadcast. A chill ran through the room. Lien stepped closer. Are you telling me that thing is communicating? Evelyn nodded. Not in any way we understand, but yes. The energy signature follows a repeating pattern. It's not just a rift in space. It's a presence, and it's awake. The implications settled over them like a storm cloud. Elias exhaled. And the station we explored? Evelyn hesitated. Captain, I think that station wasn't just abandoned. It was sealed. Elias narrowed his eyes. Sealed against what? Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. Against whatever we just woke up. A sudden warning klaxon blared through Omega 1. Red lights flashed as the AI's voice echoed through the chamber. Alert. Unidentified energy surge detected. Proximity warning. Unknown contact approaching. Elias' pulse spiked. Where? The hollow display flickered. Outside the research station, space itself warped. A rift had appeared in the void. It wasn't natural. It was controlled, as if space had been folded open. And from within, something began to emerge. It was colossal, far larger than anything the Imperium had ever fielded. Not a ship, not in any way that could be comprehended, but a shape, black against the blackness of space. It shimmered, shifting between solidity and nothingness, its form flickering like an optical illusion. And then, the station's sensor screamed. Warning! Gravitational anomalies detected. Station integrity compromised. Omega 1 lurched. The artificial gravity fluctuated as the entity's presence distorted space around it. Crew members staggered as alarms blared in every direction. Elias grabbed the nearest console. Get us out of here. Evelyn was pale. We can't. Whatever that thing is, it's disrupting our navigation systems. Outside, the thing moved. It wasn't a ship. It was ancient, a being made of darkness and gravity, something older than stars, older than time itself. And then, the station's comms activated, but no one had touched them. A voice filled the air. Not a language, not words, a whisper. It slithered through the speakers, an impossible sound that sent a primal terror down the spine of every human who heard it. The voice was not meant for mortal ears. The lights flickered, the walls trembled. Then the whispering stopped, and a single word, clear, deliberate, undeniable, spoke. Leave. For the first time since entering the dead zone, Elias Mercer felt true, paralyzing fear. Because he knew, in that moment, that humanity had made a mistake. They had woken something that should have been left alone, and it had just given them a warning. One final warning. The message, if it could be called that, still echoed in Captain Elias Mercer's mind as the Aurora and the surviving research stations retreated from Omega 1's former position. The entity's single word, leave, had not been a request. It had been a command. And then, the station had been obliterated. No weapons had been fired. No explosion had followed. Omega 1 had simply ceased to exist in the same way the Osiris and the Recon shuttle had. One moment it was there. The next, it was gone, erased from reality by a force beyond understanding. The Aurora now drifted at the edges of the dead zone, accompanied by the remaining research stations, Omega 2 and Omega 3. But no one felt safe. The entity had made its presence known. It had awoken, and there was no telling what it would do next. Elias stood at the center of the bridge, arms crossed, as he listened to Commander Lien Porter give the latest status report. Omega 2 and Omega 3 have powered down all non-essential systems, Lien said, her voice tight with tension. They're maintaining radio silence and reducing energy output to avoid detection. Elias nodded. And the Imperium? Lien hesitated. They know. Silence fell over the bridge. Lieutenant Hadfield was the first to speak. How much do they know? Lien tapped her console, bringing up a display of Imperium fleet movements. The icons representing Imperial warships were shifting, reorganizing, repositioning. The Imperium had received humanity's reports. and they were responding. They've mobilized 3 full battle groups, Lien said, each led by a dreadnought. They're headed directly for our location. Elias felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The Imperium had always feared the dead zone. Their centuries of silence, of refusing to explore it, had never been about superstition. They had known something was here. And now, because of humanity, it was awake. "We need to talk to them," Elias said. Lien looked at him sharply. "You really think they'll listen to us? They don't see humans as equals, Captain. They see us as reckless children who just kicked over an ancient tombstone." Elias turned to Hadfield. "Open a secure channel to the Imperium fleet." "Aye, sir." A few moments later, the holographic display flickered, and the image of High Admiral Tovin Var filled the screen. His cold, expressionless face betrayed nothing, but Elias could sense the tension behind his golden eyes. "Captain Mercer," Var said, his voice controlled but edged with steel, "your species has made a mistake." Elias forced himself to remain calm. "We didn't know what was in the dead zone. We came here to understand. We never intended." "You never intended?" Var's voice sharpened. "That is of little consequence now. You have disturbed the veil. You have woken it." Elias stiffened. "Then you do know what it is." Var didn't answer immediately. For the first time, something flickered in his gaze, something that almost resembled fear. "It has no name," he said at last. "Not one we can speak. It is not an enemy. It is not an empire. It is something older, something that should not be touched." Elias stepped forward. "Then why haven't you tried to stop it? Why avoid it for centuries instead of confronting it?" Var exhaled, his expression grim. "Because it cannot be confronted. It does not wage war as we do. It does not conquer as we do. It simply erases. Civilizations that encounter it do not fall. They do not surrender. They simply vanish." The weight of the words settled over the bridge like a funeral shroud. Hadfield whispered, "How do you fight something like that?" Var's gaze was unreadable. "You don't." Elias narrowed his eyes. "Then why are you mobilizing your fleets?" The High Admiral's expression hardened. "Because we have no choice." A new display appeared on the hollow screen. Imperium distress calls. Hundreds of them. Ships along the outer sectors of the Empire were going dark. Entire colonies had gone silent. It had already begun. "The entity does not care for borders," Var said. "It has awoken, and now it is spreading." Lien sucked in a breath. "You mean?" Var nodded. "It is no longer confined to the dead zone." Silence. Elias' mind raced. If this thing, this force, was expanding, then the Imperium's entire empire was at risk. It wouldn't stop at humanity. It wouldn't stop at the Imperium. If what Var said was true, then every civilization in the galaxy could be at risk of annihilation. But something didn't make sense. Elias took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. "Admiral, you said your empire has known about this entity for centuries. If that's true, then how have you survived?" Var hesitated. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "We do not know," he admitted. "Perhaps it was sleeping. Perhaps it was waiting." Elias shook his head. "No. Something held it back. Something kept it contained. Something stopped it from expanding." Var studied him. "What are you suggesting, Captain?" Elias turned to Evelyn Voss, the lead scientist still stationed at Omega-3. "Dr. Voss, is there anything in the data from the derelict station? Any kind of containment system? Any failsafe?" Evelyn's voice crackled through the comms. "We've been analyzing the station's power core, and, yes, there was a barrier, a field of some kind, but it's failing. It's been failing for centuries. And when we activated the station, when we started scanning the anomaly," she trailed off. "We broke the seal," Elias finished. Var's jaw tightened. "Then your people have doomed us all." Elias turned to him, his expression fierce. "No, not yet." Var frowned. "You think there is still a way to stop this?" Elias' mind raced. The civilizations that vanished, they weren't destroyed in battle. They were erased. And yet, for centuries, the Imperium endured right on the edge of the dead zone. That means something kept this thing contained. He turned back to Evelyn. "Doctor, if we can rebuild that containment field." Evelyn's voice was uncertain. "It's possible, but we need time, and we need resources far beyond what we have here." Var's gaze darkened. "If you can do this, You will have the full force of the Imperium behind you. Elias nodded. Then we need to move. Because if we fail, he looked at the growing reports of lost fleets, lost planets. If we fail, there won't be anything left. The War Council was held aboard the Imperator Rex, the flagship of the Imperium's armada. The chamber was vast and adorned with golden banners bearing the insignia of the Imperium Eternal. Normally, no human would have been permitted within these halls, let alone allowed to speak. But nothing about the current situation was normal. Captain Elias Mercer stood at the center of the war table, facing a dozen Imperium admirals, strategists, and scientists. At the head of the table sat High Admiral Tovin Var, his expression unreadable. Around them, holographic projections flickered, maps of the dead zone, sensor readings of the entity, and disturbing reports of entire planets going dark. The Imperium, for all its arrogance, was afraid. Elias had their attention. This thing isn't just expanding, he said, his voice firm. It's accelerating. If we don't stop it now, we won't get another chance. Var's golden eyes narrowed. And yet you believe you have a solution where the Imperium has failed for centuries. Elias didn't waver. I believe humanity has a different way of looking at problems. And right now, that's exactly what you need. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Evelyn Voss stepped forward. The scientist had barely slept in days, but the fire in her eyes had not dimmed. We've analyzed the ancient station, she said, and we know how the containment field worked. She tapped a command on the war table. A holographic projection appeared, displaying a vast, interlinked grid, a network of energy barriers woven through space itself. This structure, Evelyn continued, wasn't built to destroy the entity. It was built to contain it. It functioned like an enormous cosmic prison, stretching across an area even larger than the Imperium's borders. One of the Imperium strategists scoffed. And yet, it has failed. Evelyn nodded. Yes, because it was never maintained. It's been deteriorating for millennia. The moment we started scanning, we triggered a cascade failure. Elias stepped in. That's why we need to rebuild it. Lien Porter, standing beside him, exhaled. You're talking about reactivating a million-year-old alien containment system across light years of space, while an unfathomable entity tries to wipe us from existence. Elias nodded. Exactly. One of the Imperium admirals scoffed. This is absurd. We should focus on evacuation. We can consolidate our forces, relocate our core worlds. Var slammed his gauntlet fist onto the table, silencing the room. His golden eyes burned. There is nowhere to run. He turned to Elias. What do you need? Elias took a deep breath. This was it. Their last shot. We need Imperium ships, he said. And we need access to your deep space relays. If we can establish energy anchors across key points of the containment field, we can reactivate it. Var folded his arms. And the entity? Evelyn's face darkened. That's the problem. She brought up another projection, this time displaying anomaly growth rates. If we start reactivating the field, the entity will know. It will react. Elias met Var's gaze. We'll need to distract it. A murmur spread through the council. One of the Imperium warlords sneered. How do you distract something that devours entire civilizations? Elias clenched his jaw. You give it something to focus on. Var understood immediately. You want to fight it. The room tensed. Hadfield spoke next. We don't need to win. We just need to buy time. A grim silence fell. No one here believed they could defeat the entity. But if they could slow it down, if they could draw its attention away from the reactivation effort, then maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Var exhaled. We will assemble the fleet. A human might have thanked him. Elias simply nodded. Then let's move. The Imperium and human fleets mobilized faster than any campaign in history. Dreadnoughts, cruisers, and entire battle groups converged on key points of the ancient containment grid. The objective was simple: repair and reactivate the energy relays. But that meant holding the line against an entity beyond comprehension. Elias stood on the bridge of the Aurora, watching as the first wave of contact occurred. It began with shadows. At the farthest edges of the containment grid, the void itself seemed to twist. Shapes flickered in and out of perception, vast, shifting titanic forms that defied physics. They were neither ships nor creatures, but something in between. Then, reality screamed. The anomaly ripped open, and the full force of the entity's presence emerged. A wave of nothingness washed over the fleet, and the first line of ships vanished instantly. The Imperium fleet opened fire. Tens of thousands of energy lances, railguns, and plasma bursts filled space with fire and fury. But the entity did not move like a conventional enemy. It unraveled, appearing and disappearing in different locations, as if it existed in multiple places at once. And then it struck back. Ships buckled as unseen forces tore through them. Imperium dreadnoughts, with shields strong enough to withstand supernova blasts, were ripped apart in an instant. The fleet was being shredded, but they held. Elias gritted his teeth. Hold position. We buy them time. Across the battlefield, Imperium engineers and human scientists worked frantically to reactivate the grid's anchors. One by one, the relays flickered to life, forming glowing barriers of energy. Evelyn's voice came over the comms. Captain, we're at 70% containment. Elias could see it. The entity was slowing. It was aware. It knew, but it was too late. Lien turned to him, her eyes wide. The grid is coming online. A final surge of energy rippled across space. The containment field snapped shut, sealing the entity inside. And then, silence. The entity did not vanish. It did not die, but it was contained. The surviving ships of the fleet drifted in the aftermath. The battlefield was littered with wreckage, the cost of victory steep. But the galaxy had been saved. Elias let out a long breath. They had done it. The Imperium, after centuries of fearing the dead zone, had seen a different species step forward and fix the problem they had never dared face. The war was over, and humanity, against all odds, had won. The silence after the battle was unnatural. The battlefield, once alive with fire and death, was now eerily still. Wreckage drifted through the void, remnants of ships that had stood against an entity beyond comprehension. The Imperium fleet, though bloodied, remained. The containment field now pulsed with energy, stretching across the dead zone like an ancient, luminous web. They had succeeded, but Captain Elias Mercer knew it wasn't over. Standing on the bridge of the Aurora, he watched the hollow display flicker. The containment grid was stable, for now. But something was still wrong. Evelyn Voss' voice crackled over the comms. Captain, I'm picking up distortions. Elias turned. What kind of distortions? Evelyn hesitated. I don't think the entity is fully contained. A cold weight settled over the bridge. High Admiral Tovin Var's image appeared on the hollow display. His golden eyes were narrowed. Explain. Evelyn's hands flew over the controls at Omega 3, pulling up data streams. The grid is holding, but I'm detecting fluctuations. The entity isn't trying to escape. It's trying to adapt. Elias exhaled sharply. Meaning, Evelyn swallowed. Meaning we haven't stopped it. We've just made it evolve. A pulse of energy surged through the containment grid. For a moment, space itself seemed to warp. The Imperium ships nearest the grid reported failing systems, hull fractures appearing where no weapons had struck. And then came the whispers, not through the comms, not through any detectable sound wave. Inside their minds, Elias staggered, his vision blurring as something vast and incomprehensible pressed against his consciousness. It wasn't speaking in words. It was forcing itself into his thoughts. It saw him. It saw all of them. And it was learning. Lien clutched the console, her face pale. It's not just trapped. It's trying to break reality itself. The Imperium officers were visibly shaken. Some stood rigid. Others seemed to be fighting an unseen force. Var gritted his teeth, his hands clutching the table as if sheer willpower could force the entity from his mind. We need a solution, Elias growled. Fast. Evelyn's voice was frantic. The containment grid won't hold if it keeps destabilizing. If it adapts, if it finds a way to phase through it, we'll be right back where we started. Elias clenched his jaw. There was only one option left. Can we collapse the grid? Silence. Then Ver spoke. You mean to turn the containment field into a weapon? Elias nodded. If we can collapse the energy field inwards, detonate it like a gravitational implosion, we might be able to sever its connection to this reality. Evelyn looked horrified. That could work, but it could also tear apart everything inside the dead zone, including our stations. And everyone still inside, Hadfield added grimly. Elias exhaled. What's the alternative? Let it break through and consume the galaxy. No one spoke. Var's gaze hardened. We will do what must be done. He turned to his officers. Prepare for final detonation. The plan was simple. The Imperium dreadnoughts would overload the grid's central energy nodes, forcing a controlled collapse inward. This would cause the containment field to fold in on itself, creating a singularity that would sever the entity from this plane of existence. The cost? Every ship still within the dead zone would be annihilated. Countdown to collapse. 15 minutes, the AI intoned. The Imperium fleet pulled back, but the Aurora and a handful of ships had to remain to manually detonate the core relays. Elias strapped himself into the command chair. We do this together. Lien nodded grimly. Until the end. As the countdown ticked, the entity made its final move. It pushed against the containment grid, distorting space, causing reality fractures to bloom across the field. Ships twisted unnaturally, their hulls bending like liquid. Some were pulled into the darkness without a sound. And then, it manifested. For the first time, the entity took form. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a creature. It was an absence, a void in the shape of something that defied comprehension. It loomed over them, larger than any fleet, its presence pressing into their minds, drowning them in thought that wasn't theirs. Elias gritted his teeth. Light it up. The remaining ships unleashed hell. Everything they had, plasma lances, railguns, missiles, pounded into the entity. The Aurora led the charge, pushing closer to the core relays. The countdown hit 2 minutes. The grid fractured, but the final relays were charged. Then the Aurora was hit. A pulse of energy surged through the ship, knocking Elias from his chair. The bridge exploded in sparks as consoles burst apart. Lien screamed, blood streaming down her face as she struggled to hold onto her station. Elias pulled himself up, his vision blurred. The core relays were ready. He slammed the final command. Detonate. The grid imploded. The energy field collapsed inward, pulling everything with it. The entity howled, not in sound, but in the minds of all who had defied it. The Imperium dreadnoughts detonated their final payloads, pushing the singularity to full collapse. Then, silence. The entity was gone. The Aurora was barely functional. Fires burned in the shattered corridors. The ship drifted at the edge of the newly stabilized dead zone. But they had survived. Elias coughed, struggling to rise. Lien, bleeding but alive, helped him up. Hadfield's voice came weakly over the comms. It's over. Outside, the Imperium ships that had survived watched in stunned silence as the dead zone returned to darkness. But this time it was different. The whispers were gone. High Admiral Var's image flickered onto the display. For the first time, the unshakable Imperium leader looked at Elias with something other than disdain. Respect. The Imperium owes you a debt, Var said. Elias exhaled. We all survived. That's what matters. Var's gaze was unreadable. Humanity did what we never could. Elias nodded. Because we don't run from the unknown. We face it. The Imperium, for all its might, had feared the dead zone for centuries. But it was humans, reckless, stubborn, and relentless, who had saved them all. As the fleet turned toward home, Elias knew one thing for certain. This was not the end of humanity's story in the stars. This was only the beginning.